Hot take, but without the printing press, there wouldn't have been Galileo, the American and French revolutions, or Protestantism. One major invention that led to huge changes in society during the Renaissance is the printing press. Of course, Chinese printers invented it first, by far. The world's first movable type printing on paper was done using porcelain, not metal, and was invented around 1040 CE in China, 11th century CE, during the Northern Song dynasty, by the inventor Bi Sheng, 990 to 1051 CE, but it was not widely used. Woodblock printing was still the norm. This is due to practical considerations. In Chinese and many other Asian languages, each character needed to have its own individual porcelain-type piece. But Chinese language had at least 8,000 regularly used characters. Roughly 20,000 are needed to read a newspaper today, and thousands more less frequently used. So movable porcelain type did not increase the speed or ease of printing in Chinese. Metal movable type was used to print only the identifying code on the earliest paper money during the Song dynasty, 1161. The oldest extant book printed completely with movable type, Jikji, was printed in Korea 200 years later, 1377. The use of movable type mostly stayed in East Asia, but occasionally we have written reports of movable type technology being brought to Europe by returning traders and missionaries to China. Eventually, as traders and missionary travelers between Europe and China multiplied, Europeans saw the opportunity in this type of printing. European languages used the Latin alphabet with only about 26 letters, not the thousands of characters needed for Chinese printing, which made metal typepieces for them much easier, cheaper, and faster to produce by casting multiples of the same type. By 1451, in Germany, the goldsmith Johannes Gutenberg and his partner Johann Fust machined an early modern printing press with movable cast metal type, which stamped the inked image of letters or shapes or illustrations onto inexpensive rag paper. Gutenberg and Fust published more than 150 large-format copies of the Bible in Latin, the Gutenberg Bible. The copies sold like hotcakes. The press could print up to 3,600 pages a day. But very quickly, printing expanded beyond the Bible. Pico della Mirandola's 900 Theses and his oration on the dignity of man are a good example of what was happening. Pico lived from 1463 to 1494. This means Pico was born 12 years after Gutenberg's and Fust's printing press came into existence. He, as well as others of his time, such as Thomas More, Desiderius Erasmus, Martin Luther, and the woodprint artist Albrecht Dürer, born in 1471, never knew a time when the printing press was not available. What this meant for Pico and his fellow philosophers is that if they had enough money to do it, and Pico, Count of Concordia, certainly did, they could print their ideas and disseminate them, even ones the church, kings, or emperors did not approve. Prior to the invention of the printing press, all books and other materials had to be written by hand, usually by monks or other church-related scribes. Apart from being laborious and slow, this meant that in Western Europe, the church had its choice of which books would be made available. Also, most of the books were printed in Latin, the language of the church. Average people did not have an extensive knowledge of Latin, and during the early medieval period, of course, not Latin, but instead national and regional languages, vernacular languages, were being used to communicate in all areas of Europe and the Mediterranean. Almost no books produced by monks and scribes used these languages. And books were expensive. Their pages were made of vellum, which is refined, polished, scraped cowhide, leather. Even the cheapest book depended on several cowhides. Cows were expensive, so leather was not very cheap. Moreover, education was expensive. Literacy was not more than 20% during most parts of Europe in the medieval period. Learning to read was a step toward a career in law or the church. It was something that sons and daughters of the nobility or aristocracy learned, and it wasn't offered to average farmers, midwives, blacksmiths, tailors, or field laborers, male or female. People who learned these trades did it by apprenticing themselves to more experienced craftspeople and learning directly by copying them, not by reading books. Your family needed to be rich to send you to university to study Latin, Greek, philosophy, law, and theology, to pursue a professional career in the church bureaucracy or as a professional lecturer and researcher at a university. There was no general sense that this education should be offered to everybody. The printing press changed all this. Books were less expensive now. Using cotton paper instead of vellum even allowed poor people to sell their old clothing and rags to printers for money, which created a niche economy of rag pickers. Being able to make many copies quickly and to reuse the 26 letters of the alphabet also lowered the cost. Almost anything could be printed and distributed by anyone. Censorship regimes did, of course, immediately grow up. The church started its first lists of banned books, and Pico's 900 Theses was the first printed book to be banned and burned. Kings and queens had the power to stop anti-royal writings by similarly banning the publication of some books in their realm. But they could not really keep up with the pace of printed materials in all languages that began to fly off the presses. And people wanted to read now that they could read interesting stories in their own languages. Literacy began to climb. So Pico was able to print copies of his 900 Theses for debate without getting monks to copy it and without checking in with the head of the church or even his local bishop. With access to a printing press, he was a loose cannon, and one among many. The printing press showed everyone how easy it was to share their opinions widely, sort of like Renaissance Twitter or Instagram. Now people everywhere could not only sit down alone and read stories about romance and travel and other things the church might not agree with entirely, but they could also aspire to print up their own ideas and have others in other places read them. This was the start of broader conversations across Europe and beyond, and a revolution.